When the recreation ground was opened in 1876, Town Section 1086, in which the Waterwheel is now located, wasn't part of the grounds. This section, which included a pretty waterfall, was purchased in 1886. A bridge over the waterfall, an access path were added in 1891. The first indication that the park committee was seriously considering a waterwheel came in a report by Jack Goodwin in 1967, titled, Water Effects in the Park. In this report, Jack suggested that the stream of water from the overflow of the lake, through the sunken dell next to the tea house, could be used to drive an old electricity turbine, a hydraulic ram or a water wheel. The following year, George Fuller, Alan Jellerman, and Ian McDowell produced reports describing their vision for future park developments. In Ian McDowell's report, he produced several sketches, one of which showed a water wheel in the sunken dell. Following the successful completion of the waterfall in 1970, attention turned to the possibility of installing a water wheel. George Fuller and others were always on the lookout for items that could be salvaged. The following section is from an article written by George Fuller, and tells of how he stumbled across the water wheel at the Omata dairy factory, that would eventually be installed in the park.
The breakthrough came in the form of a pure accident in February 1973, when, in visiting a son engaged in holiday work at the Omata dairy factory, there was an electricity cut. I turned the conversation with staff to the pre-electricity era, and it was revealed that relics of the water wheel which originally provided power were still present beside the factory. I was shown the remnants of a wheel that had not turned for about 40 years. It was no less than 12 feet in diameter by 6 feet wide. 12 feet was the head of water entering the dell near Gilbert Street, making it the perfect site for such a water wheel. Although all the woodwork was in an advanced state of decay, the bearing housings, axle, hubs, and a mass of cast iron gearing were still in great condition. Having gained acceptance of the prospect that there was a good chance that the wheel would be restored if the relics were donated to the park, I arranged for Fitzroy Engineering to carry out an inspection. They gave a strong thumbs up and later would not only transport the prize, but also clean all the iron work and paint it where appropriate. Meanwhile, permission had to be gained from the council to carry out the work. With a stroke of customary genius, Mr. Goodwin proposed that the wheel be restored and installed in the park as a centennial project, and even got the Taranaki County Council to assist with a $500 donation. Ian had been involved with the negotiations from the outset, and given this clearance, set about preparing scale drawings of the wheel before anything was removed. Based on these drawings, the joinery firm of Jones and Sanford reconstructed the wooden components, and the Taranaki Harbours Board donated the 2 large hardwood-bearing beams. Preparation of the site was a massive undertaking because Ian and I had agreed to carry out the work with our respective teams, and there weren't even access paths down into the area. In order to fully exploit viewing potential and provide the unique opportunity of being able to pass behind the wheel, we laid a pathway which encompassed the entire rim overlooking the site, then completed the almost parallel loop at the level of the wheel. Excavating down to solid ground, upon which to establish the foundations for the walkway and wheel was very laborious manual work. Ian's team concentrated on the solid stonework required behind and to the side of the wheel, using in the lower courses large blocks hewn by prisoners originally for the vault of the old New Plymouth Post Office and for curb stones. We were very anxious to preserve the integrity and character of the mostly native trees growing around the rim. At the time there were no mobile cranes available with telescoping derricks strong enough to be able to thread the almost ton load of the wheel between the trees, so we opted to have each rim divide into 2 halves, then carried the 4 components down, plus the axle assembly etc., and assembled the wheel on site. I located the wheel in 1973. Work started on the site in the summer of 1974. Assembly of the wheel started in 1975. It was commissioned to commemorate the centennial of Pukekura Park on the 29th of May 1976. The Festival of the Lights in the summer of 1976-77 was centered around the Fountain Lake and children's playground area, so that the wheel could be featured for the first time, and was certainly an unforgettable spectacle.
The Omata wheel had rim gearing. A large, inwards-facing toothed cast-iron wheel, was fixed to the outside of one of the wheel's rims. At the dairy factory, a 12-inch pinion gear engaged with this, and as the wheel turned, power was transmitted into the mill by a high-speed shaft that carried the pinion. This design removed the rotational stress from the Waterwheel's axle. Unfortunately, it also had the effect of unbalancing the wheel, as this large heavy ring was only on one side. When the wheel was rebuilt, the cast-iron rim gear was fitted to the restored wheel to make it authentic, even though there was no intention of using it as a driver. It was assumed that because the wheel was going to be freewheeling, the imbalance would not be an issue, and it would turn for years, trouble-free. What eventuated was explained by George in his article.
When we had the faithfully restored wheel installed in the park, we did not couple the countershaft because of constraints of space, sound, and safety. Another modification was to replace the grease cup bearing lubrication with 2 copper high-pressure hydraulic lines for remote servicing with a grease gun. Lock access was provided to both sides, but because the wheel would never be laden, somewhat naively as has transpired, we presumed that it would turn forever with very little need for servicing. It quickly shattered our dream. The incessant turning of the unbalanced ton mass at idling speed 24 hours per day, over a prolonged period without regular attention, was sufficient to gradually work the authentic shims and wedges loose, and upset the trim. We just could not keep up with the demand for attention, and at one stage replaced the steel shims and wedges with wedges of Periri hardwood, but they were also chomped up. There ensued a period of years during which numerous very clever and generous well-wishers offered the perfect solution, to the point where the original hub assembly is no longer recognizable, having had spacers, brackets and flanges of various types welded in for stability. However, the relentless movement continued to impose stress on weaker components, resulting in breakage of diagonal wooden braces, and wear around the seat of steel tie rods etc., progressively destroying equilibrium. With the advent of mobile cranes with telescoping derricks, the wheel was removed for repair and strengthening between September and December of 1989, and yet again in the 1990s, but it has continued to relentlessly self-destruct into what is now a very unsafe condition. This, coupled that with the benefit of hindsight, it is obvious that it was unwise to locate it in direct line with the ravine upstream, which converts high flows into an uncontrollable raging torrent of immense destructive power, means that its removal and replacement with a wheel of simpler, balanced design is the logical action to take.
In 2003, a decision was made to repair the wheel, and to move it east, taking it out of the path of the stream. The following year it was decided to build a new wheel, which was designed by New Plymouth engineer Michael Lawley, and built in his shed at his Kent Road property. Work started on the project in December of 2004, with the removal of the old wheel. Another aspect of the project was to remove access from behind the Waterwheel, and to build a new bridge across the stream in front of it. Unfortunately, the new bridge did not eventuate. The new wheel was installed in November of 2005. It was fitted with a gearbox, driven from the Waterwheel's axle, enabling it to generate electricity if required. Unfortunately, it was also fitted with the old cast-iron rim gear, for aesthetic reasons, which was a mistake. During the construction of the new wheel, George had raised concerns about the imbalance this would introduce, but was assured that this would not be an issue. It was George's belief that the ring gear should have stayed on the old wheel, and kept whole, to be displayed somewhere else. In July of 2006, while walking by the wheel, George heard a clunk-clunk noise, but could see no obvious source. The bolts on the stirrup clamping the hub to the axle, on the playground side of the wheel had been ejected. This was fixed, but George noticed the same thing again in July. In August, George wrote a letter, urging the removal of the cast-iron ring gear, and fitting it onto the old wheel. Again, in January 2007, George reported disturbing noises coming from the wheel, which got worse as time went on. The wheel was repaired in situ in September 2007. More repairs were carried out in June 2009, when the wheel was removed and fitted with new bearings and drive shaft. The Waterwheel was removed again in July 2010 for another new drive shaft. During one of these repairs, the cast iron rim gear was removed.